Hey everyone, my name is Zack Neher, and welcome to the Natural World Podcast, recording in the Roof Lizard Lounge at the Dinosaur Hotel in Lakewood, Colorado. This podcast will mostly focus on natural history and science, but we will delve into a number of other topics as well. If you enjoy what you hear, make sure you check out my blog at thenaturalworldconnections.wordpress.com. Thanks for joining us. During World War II, American soldiers found themselves fighting for their lives on tiny little outcrops of rock and sand in the middle of the vast Pacific Ocean in an attempt to keep the forces of the Japanese in check. Although insignificant in terms of land area, these tiny islands became very important staging points for the American military to get closer and closer to the Japanese mainland. Sometime soon we'll be talking about the historic Battle of Midway, as well as some of the current issues facing the seabirds that nest on the Midway Atoll. Today, we are going to talk to Doug Hartshorn, the museum coordinator at the Morrison Natural History Museum in Colorado, where he coordinates tours, trains volunteers, and works as a docent for the museum. In 1972, he was deployed for a little over a month on Wake Island, a small atoll more than 2,000 miles west of Honolulu. Today, he's going to share his personal experiences from that time with us. Welcome to the show, Doug.
Thank you, Zack.
So, Doug, tell us how you found yourself heading out for Wake Island.
It's kind of a long story, but I'll try to be brief. I was in the Air Force in 1972 and was trained in security police in riot control, one of the few groups in the Air Force that actually had that kind of training. This was during the Vietnam War. Protests were rampant and the military felt it necessary to be able to do crowd control, riot control. And so one night, the klaxon went off. And a klaxon is an alarm that tells security police, particularly, that they need to go to their stations and report in, find out what's going on. Normally, it is just an exercise, total waste of time. So I was trying to run away, get off base, and the first sergeant was there, and he said, "Nope, get back in there, get your uniform on, and get over to the boardroom." Went there, and sure enough, they said, "This is for real. You're going to go to Guam." There were about 50 of us there, and they asked for volunteers. And I thought, wow, that'd be a great trip. I'll take it. Get out of Oklahoma. And raised my hand, one of the first 10 to do it. Then they picked about 30 extra volunteers to go. Put us on an airplane about midnight, flew to Washington, McChord Air Force Base. Hung out there for 2 days, and they told us, well, it's not really Guam, you're going to go to Wake Island, which I don't think I really knew too much about at that time. In fact, I'm sure I didn't. Boarded another airplane, flew to Hickam on Honolulu, and immediately got on another airplane. At that time, though, they told us that about half of us could go home. They didn't need everybody. So that left us about 20 that got on the 141, flew to Wake Island. Wake Island's not a big place. If you imagine a peace sign, it's a big V shape. The main island, called Wake, has a runway down one side of it. That's all the bigger it is. The other side has living quarters. Then there are two very small islands off the end called Wilkes and Peel Islands, with a little channel that goes into an enclosed lagoon. Very beautiful space. But as we flew over it, we looked down, and it looked like if you missed the runway at all, you were going in the drink, and you would, because there just isn't much space there at all. So we landed, and we got out of the airplane. There were 100 Air Force guys from Hickam that were getting right back on that airplane, and we looked at each other and said, well, 20 of us are relieving 100 of these guys. The big problem was there were Filipino civilians that were hired to come to Wake Island. They did all the work on the island. Wake Island is just a landing point, refueling point between Japan and Hawaii. So there isn't a whole lot going on there besides airplanes taking off and landing. We learned that the reason we were there is because the Filipinos planned to go on strike for higher wages. And since there was only one police officer on the island, and he was a civilian, he thought he needed some reinforcements in case things got a little bit testy. The base commander there got the guys from Hickam right away. We relieved them. We got there. They immediately told us that everything was just fine, They just wanted us to drive around in our vehicles with our guns and tear gas and all this stuff we carted with us all the way from Oklahoma to the island just to be there and make sure that everybody saw us, just a show of arms, hang out and enjoy ourselves.
Very nice. So, why is Wake Island so important?
Wake Island at the time is, as you said, a jump-off point, a midway point between Japan, essentially, and Hawaii. During World War II, this island was strategically extremely important, and it was attacked the same day as Pearl Harbor. The Japanese had a multi-pronged attack going, and they wanted to get Wake Island right away. There were 400 Marines that were on the island, and a bunch of civilians, close to about 800 civilians, I think. There were over 1,000 people on the island. All of them there to build defenses, because at that time they expected there to be a conflict with Japan. And so by December of 41, they had a few airplanes there, a couple Wildcats, I think 4, and that contingent of Marines were there to hold the island. The first Japanese invasion, land invasion, occurred on Wake Island on December 9th, 1941, and it was repulsed by the Marines. 2 days after Pearl Harbor, American soldiers actually had their first victory in the Japanese-American War. After that, the Japanese, about a month later, the Marines held out for about a month. December 23rd, 41, the Japanese launched a much larger attack with 2 aircraft carriers that actually had attacked Honolulu. And this attack was successful. So on the 24th of December 1941, the remaining Marines, about 80 were killed, quite a few civilians were killed. They surrendered. They didn't want to, but their commander actually did the surrendering. They were willing to fight.
Interesting. So, what did you do while you were on Wake Island? Did you see any evidence of this conflict?
It was everywhere. There were still bunkers. The island is littered with, at that time, was still live ordnance everywhere. You could pick up shells, some unexploded, some already just the casings, shell casings. Several of the guns that the Japanese had installed or the Marines had installed, I'm not sure which, were still in place there. But pretty much the island had returned to its natural state of a low, shrubby, just above sea level. The highest point on Wake Island's about 14 feet above sea level. And storms come through there all the time, so a lot of stuff is washed off or out in the lagoon. There are still wrecks. There's a submarine sunk in the lagoon, right in the entrance into the lagoon. Lots of evidence of the war was still there.
Interesting. So what, did you find any interesting artifacts or anything while you were there?
Well, I did. We were forgotten because when half of our force was returned and went back to Oklahoma, our base commander there thought everybody had come home. They actually didn't know they still had 20 personnel stationed on Wake Island.
That's a bit of a mistake.
Mm-hmm. Fairly typical, though. And so it took them a while for us to even figure out we were still there. So I had time. After just 3 days, the base commander said that, nothing's going to happen here. Everything's hunky-dory. Why don't you guys just take the vehicles, drive around a while. If you want to go fishing, you can do that. If you want to just explore the island. One of the people I met was the sheriff there on Wake Island. And he said there's all kinds of things still buried around. And I went out and I just pretended to be a poor young Japanese soldier. Where would I hide from the bombs? Because you have to realize that for the next 4 years, the Americans used Wake Island pretty much for target practice. This is where bombardiers were trained. They flew out of Hickam on Hawaii, to Wake Island, dropped the bombs, and flew back. In fact, George Bush, our president, his first combat role was over Wake Island, do a bombing run on Wake Island. I found a collection of rocks that looked like would be a good hiding place from bombs, and I started digging around there, and I did find a perfect Japanese beer bottle and a pair of the typical stereotypical Japanese eyeglasses with the black frames, little round lenses, were still in perfect condition. Took those to the sheriff, and the sheriff said that if I would like, he would trade me the location of a buried Japanese Zero for those eyeglasses. At that time, I only had 2 days left on the island, so I had to turn him down. But he knew where there was an entire airplane buried.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, everything was put underground because, again, this thing was intensively bombed for about 4 years. And the Japanese couldn't resupply it except by submarine, and we had a submarine blockade around Wake Island. So they got very, very few supplies, were starving almost to death by the time the war ended. In fact, there was a bird there on Wake Island, which is called the Wake Island rail, which they ate to extinction.
Really?
Yeah. So they ate everything they could and still were in really bad shape. They actually executed 90 of the people that they had kept on Wake Island to help do the fortifications, thinking that there was going to be an immediate Allied invasion of the island, which there never was. The island was simply turned back over to the United States at the end of the war.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So while you were on the island, did you see any other signs of bird life?
Oh, there are millions of birds on Wake Island and equal number of hermit crabs. I'm not sure of the species then or now, but there were nesting all over the island, flocks in the thousands. The sea life was incredible. We got to see all kinds of eels and groupers and sharks. And one time I was doing some of my lone exploration, got a snorkel gear, and I took my bayonet with me and went out swimming in the lagoon, which is beautiful, crystal clear water, just filled with corals and huge clams with brightly colored lips, I guess you'd call them in there. They were gorgeous. And I saw this black thing on the ground, and I stuck my bayonet in it, and it started bleeding. It just really freaked me out because I thought the sharks were going to come right away too, but I had no idea what it was. It was really a sea cucumber.
Interesting.
That I had stabbed. Poor little guy. But it is all in the name of science.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, is there any question that no one ever really asks about that time that you find interesting that you never really get to talk about?
About World War II?
World War II, your experiences on Wake Island, time in the Air Force.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that the first victory in World War II against the Japanese actually did occur on Wake Island just 2 days after Pearl Harbor. Most people don't realize that. Mm-hmm. And for the Marines, it's huge to know that. There's a memorial there to the Marines that died there. Most of them were sent back to Japan and then on to China, where quite a few of them made it through the end of the war and were liberated at the end of the war. To know that Wake Island has a long history of colonization from some of the Marshall people that lived on the Marshall Islands actually probably visited Wake Island. Spanish explorers actually discovered it, in quotes, in the late 1600s. That it was used by Pan American Airways as a landing point for their Trans-Pacific Airlines at that time. And even today it's still used as a stop-off point. It's the only place where there is a boat that is actually run by Air Force personnel. There's an Air Force captain that his only job is to take dignitaries out deep-sea fishing on an Air Force boat.
Interesting. Very interesting. All right. Well, thank you very much, Doug. It's been a pleasure.
It was fun. Thanks for having me over for your podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
You bet.
This is Zack Neher with the Natural World Podcast, recording out of the Best Western Denver Southwest Dinosaur Hotel in Lakewood, Colorado. Come by and stay if you want to have a roaring good time. Thanks again for listening, and make sure to check out my blog at thenaturalworldconnections.wordpress.com. We'll see you next time.